Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another book discussion between the Unerased Book Club and Ann Arbor District Library. The book that we will be talking about tonight is called Exhalation by Ted Chiang, and this is a collection of short stories. Before we get started, we can just go around and do a quick introduction. I'm Lucy. I am a library tech in the youth department at the Ann Arbor District Library. I am a white female with shoulder-length brown hair and green glasses, wearing a tan sweater, sitting in front of a wall of watercolors.
And my name is Jacob. I am an outreach technician at Ann Arbor District Library. I am a white male in his late 20s with dark blonde hair, sitting in front of a white wall.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I'm a library technician in the archives at the Ann Arbor District Library. I am an early 30s white female with dark brown hair pulled back. I have green glasses. You can't really tell in this light. I'm wearing a checkered sweater and then a dress under that with hearts on it and polka dots. And then behind me are some greenhouses against a white wall.
My name is Lauren, and I'm a desk clerk at the Ann Arbor District Library, and I am a white male wearing plaid with blonde hair and glasses.
Awesome. And I'm Sheela. I am the founder of Unerased Book Club and co-facilitator alongside Fatema Haque, who unfortunately has the flu and can't be here tonight. But I am a South Asian woman in my early 30s with glasses, black hair, half pulled back, and behind me, or my background is a photo of Adam's Peak. And I'm really excited to talk about the series of short stories in Exhalation by Ted Chiang. I want to just give a quick overview. It is a exploration of technology and humanity. Ted Chiang is a celebrated and highly decorated in terms of awards, sci-fi writer. And I'll be very honest, I tried reading this book like 5 times, multiple times on Kindle, one time with audiobook. And then I checked out the book yesterday from my local library and finally was able to get into it. It took a lot because I don't read sci-fi normally. And so I only got a little over halfway through. Spoilers are completely fine. I think that the crux, even what I read, there's so much meat in what he writes that there's not really spoilers as much as what themes and like what themes are there and how can they relate to our day-to-day life. So I want to turn it over to the 4 of you to just hear how, if you finished it, how what you thought about the collection at a high level, and then we'll organically go from there.
I would just have to say, like, this is not a book I think I ever would have been drawn to. Like, I don't read a lot of science fiction. I do love short stories, but I was blown away by these stories. I don't know if sometimes you just read something and you connect with it. But first of all, I think his writing is astounding. As you were saying, Sheela, he's not written very much, but he's gotten every award multiple times in science fiction. But I also feel like these stories were about science fiction. They were science fiction in the sense that they were using science in fiction to help like illuminate the human experience, basically. And they seem to be, for me, a lot more of like philosophy and questions of philosophy and even getting into a little religion. So I just have to say, like, I'm so glad that I read these stories. I can't stop talking about them to people. So I'm excited to talk about them. And thank you once again, Unerased Book Club, because I never would have picked this up. So it's all the gushing I'll do for now.
I kind of had a hard time getting into it. Like, I don't know. I read the first 2 stories. Like the first one was kind of long. And that was like the Arabian Nights based one where it was like stories and stories. And I really liked that one. And then I think the second one was like short. And I was like, yeah, I read that. It was like a page long. And the third one is like the Digiance one. And I was kind of slogging through that one. But once I finished that one, I really enjoyed it. And yeah, I don't know, like I liked every story in this. And like Lucy said, I noticed there's like a lot of philosophy interwoven in here and a lot of big questions. So yeah, I'm excited to get into it more.
I got halfway through this book myself. I didn't finish. And I I don't think that sci-fi is also a genre that I usually venture into. And I think that, as I was preparing for this conversation, I was really at a loss about like what to say about any of the stories that I did read. So I also am excited to hear from you all and maybe get a different take on some of the stuff that I, read. I think also I will just say there seems to be a lot going on in these stories. That much is clear. And I think I understood it on a certain plane. And yeah, we'll see what happens here in this conversation.
To echo some of the concerns that you guys have voiced so far, I really had to talk myself into being capable of reading these stories, if that makes any sense. I said to myself, you are smart. You can understand this. You can at least try to understand this. And it's a short story. It's 30 some pages. I can do this. But I had to tell myself that because I was like, oh, geez, what? Especially the story, the second one, which is the title story. It was so detailed about the mechanisms of how the brain was working. And I was just like, you can stay with it. You can stick with it. You can read it and you know what you're doing. You can do this. Did it pay off for me in the end? Hell yeah. But did it take an inordinate amount of effort? It surely did.
I feel in great company now because that's exactly how I felt for a few of the stories. And when I was texting with Fatema today, just because I asked her if there are any big thoughts that she wanted to share to send them over, and I'll make sure to share them with you all. But she reads at such a deeper level for some of this stuff, and this book was her pick. And I was just like, am I like a fifth grader trying to read a high school book? Like, what is happening? Like, what am I not getting? And I realized I just needed to like recognize that my reactions were intentional. Like that's what he wants us to think about. And if I take a little bit more time, I can, like delve into those feelings a little bit more. So for instance, the Digiance long short story, which was like well over 50 pages or closer to, I don't know how many pages. I just kept thinking about the life cycle of a startup and how the tension for me in this short story was this startup had died, but we still see the after effects of what happens to a company. And it's not even getting into the tech part. It's very much stuff that you and I see day to day with small companies getting funding and then going bust. And that like the two employees that kept up with the technology after it went under, like that exhaustion I could feel. And that I think was part of the slog for that long story. And it has nothing to do with the actual technology, but it's a very real way that we all exist in this economy, is seeing those small bursts of venture capital and then going under.
I thought that story was interesting too, from the perspective of like raising a child almost, in that, I think we look at a lot of technology now and we think we want it to do what we want it to do when it's created. And I think that like what I took from this story is that if you want to create AI that is human-like and exists in a human world, then you have to give it the same amount of time and attention that you would give to a human. And you don't expect a child to be born and be able to do all the things. And yet, there's like a certain speed that people want this company to, grow at, and want these Digiants to be like people with conscious thoughts and independent thoughts. And we don't expect that of our children, and yet we want the same thing from these beings. And so I feel like the people who stuck with it had to almost make this decision of like, these are actually more like children than they are like machines and pieces of technology and something that we're selling. But I just kept coming back to that, like, parenthood piece of it almost, because it felt like, you know, they were raising kids.
I feel like that came up to the characters too. They're like, well, should I do this or should I do that? And then they're like, wait, this isn't a kid. This isn't even a person. It's an AI. Like, what are we doing? Like, how are we supposed to interact with it? And I think that's a big question, like the philosophical question for the story. Well, one of them, there are several, but like, yeah, like what is our relationship to AI? And I thought it was interesting that they, like Lucy, you were saying, they wanted to, or people wanted this to basically come about without any work or time. And over people would try, and it's like you come back to the same point. And then the people who are like working on this product that could possibly give them what they want, they're like, no, that's already done. That's past. So it just shows like the life cycle of software objects is very short.
And I think that story out of all of them was the one that I most felt was like, we are living under the boot of capitalism. Like that's the one where I felt the boot the most, which I thought was interesting. It almost reminded me of my sister has a dog, and he is a bit of a diva, and she, you know, she lets him do whatever he wants to do, and a product of that is like there's certain things that he just can't do, like run around off the leash unless there's a fence, or there's certain aspects of being a dog that he really can't do because he just hasn't been trained, if you will. And I kind of felt that echoed in the story as well, is like sometimes the most difficult decisions when raising a child, or in this case, raising a AI, if you will, you have to make really tough decisions, and not decisions that might cause pain or difficulty, or, but yeah.
Yeah, I thought that story I did manage to read that. That was where I ended my reading of this book. And that was interesting how, like people were saying, you feel the pressure of time of like, okay, we're still trying to do this thing because of it. And we're all alone. I mean, we're really up against, we're all alone. And so it's up to us to think creatively. And I mean, I have questions about the story, about the choices of the hardcore group of users who really care about these digits. I honestly just don't know what to make of this whole idea, because
We're kind of losing you a little bit,
options
Lauren.
that's presented hardcore people really love these digits. We'll
Oops. He'll hopefully be back.
No worries.
Yeah.
But to your point, Lucy, about the parenting or raising a child, I kind of remind me of like Tamagotchis in like the late 90s, where it was such a disposable idea of caretaking, where, okay, it's dead now, we'll just put it in a drawer and maybe play with it next year. And this is just like the modern take on Tamagotchis. And Elizabeth, yeah, I actually couldn't figure out the AI component, like the actual tech of it. Like, is it like they eventually built the physical aspect, but was it like Sims where you have an avatar that you play with? And I like that you didn't have to really understand that aspect of it to have all these questions about what does it mean to caretake or to be disposed of on the Digitech side.
Yeah. Are you there, Lauren?
Internet would
So
be
low.
better than at work. Can you hear me?
On and off.
Oh, dang. I'm really sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. You can keep telling us what you're telling us about.
Okay. All right. I'll give it a try. So yeah, I guess one of the questions I had was about this like complexity regarding allowing these digients to be sexual beings. And like, there's disagreement, and there's actually like some very interesting sounds. It seems like very intelligent back and forth amongst these users.
We're losing you again.
Digit, really kind of human parents, to give them. I don't want to call it sexual agency, because it's even more like complicated than that, right? It's not like, oh yeah, we want to let them be, sexual beings. It's like, well, you're kind of letting them give the opportunity to other humans to use them sexually. Right? Do I have that right? I mean, I'm very confused about this myself. So I'm very interested in other people's ideas about like, where does sexuality fit into this story?
Well, I think like that, what the agency part is another thing that kind of reminded me of parenthood. And then if you pair it with like what you were saying, Sheela, about the Tamagotchis and these disposable kind of things that you raise, like what you never got to with those was giving them autonomy and agency. And I think as a parent, that's something that's very difficult. Is there are things like you have to be able to, if you fully want these AI to be functioning members of your human society, you're going to have to give them the same kind of decision-making capabilities that you give humans. And some of the things that you have to allow children to do that are really difficult are to make decisions that seem controversial to you as adults. And there's a certain point when I think you have to, like, I think it was really interesting in this story how the Digents would weigh in themselves and say, no, we want to do this. Like this is where we want to go. And I think there's that caution, and there was definitely a way for the people who created them to see how the system could be abused, because that's something that we see in our world of technology a lot, but I don't know if I really have a point about this. I just think it raised so many interesting questions about, like, if you really want to create something, and do we want to create something? Do we really want AI that are as fully functioning as humans? Because then we would have to be able to let go a little bit. And then, this kind of gets into that capitalist piece, Jacob, that you were saying too, because it's like, are they going to become functioning members of a capitalist society and then take, like there's that age old worry that humans have of like, well, where's my space going to be then as a human? I don't know. That's like getting into the whole, all of it. But I just felt like it, even without understanding how they were created or anything, I just think the idea of like creating creating beings in that way and then wanting to be able to decide what it is that they can and can't do is a really interesting question.
One of the companies towards the end of the short story that was looking at acquiring or providing the resources for the Digients to continue to live on, straight up said, we're not looking for their intelligence or superhuman intelligence. We're looking for a superhuman prompt, reducing them down to commodity or something that can be sold.
I think it's interesting too, like the way that they would gain personhood was to become a corporation. Like that's obviously a very pointed parallel that he draws there. So like the very idea of personhood is in this universe and mostly in ours, like tied to productivity, and the Digients are like, I want a job. And they're like, where did you hear that?
Yeah, I didn't understand. I honestly just didn't understand. It made me think about like kind of as this idea of like Digients were maybe corporations or becoming corporations. It made me think of like Citizens United, and kind of vaguely about like, oh wow, like our society really values like corporate personhood quite a lot, it would seem, maybe at the expense of other aspects of our society. I'm not sure what if there was a point there, a connection that I missed. I think that like I liked what you said at the beginning, Jacob, that like you really had to slow down and like psych yourself up for these stories. Perhaps I didn't really do that. I was just really like ready to just be delighted and entertained. And I think on a certain level I was, but on another level I was like kind of like checking behind me, thinking like, I think I missed the bus here. Dang.
I was actually talking to some of my friends, like when I first started reading the story or the stories, and like just talking about how I used to love science fiction when I was a teen. And I don't really read it much anymore. And I felt like coming back to it was like an experience where I was like, you have to let yourself go and give all expectation away and like just wait for it to make sense. Like it's a very different experience as a reader to reading a lot of types of fiction. So yeah, I thought that was like, I had to tell myself a lot of times, like, you don't understand now, but you will in a few pages. Maybe.
Yeah, I felt like that was, and maybe why I enjoyed it the way I did, is that I don't read a lot of science fiction. And so I was like, I don't really understand the little details of how this is coming together, but there's a much bigger point. Like there's a bigger point here that's interesting to me. So I guess once I did sort of say like, you don't have to understand everything about how this, how these like lungs are being taken, or this robot, I don't know why it's taking apart its own brain. Like, I don't know how, but it's an interesting idea to me that like, what if you could actually like look inside your own brain? How earth-shattering that would be, So
I think so much of these stories, not to be too meta, but the stories are also can get meta, so maybe it's the right time to be meta. I was also a big sci-fi reader growing up, and I think that as a younger reader, I was just less inhibited. I was like when I see this New York Times sticker, that meant nothing to me when I was 14. But now as an adult, I look at it and I go, this is important stuff. I need to understand this stuff. And as a younger reader, I just would have read it and been like, oh, that's cool. That's cool. There's like robots. Look at each other's brains. That's cool. And I had to kind of adopt that attitude when reading these. But it was interesting to consider how I read now and how I used to read. And although there are things that signify that maybe this book is deeply important, I can still read it just for fun.
So I've never been. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Alyssa. Please.
Oh, I was just gonna say like a good fun example in the book, I think, is like the robot ad. And it kind of like draws on to what we were saying about like parenting and ideas of parenting. And that one's obviously a bit more like directly about parenting and kind of like the nature nurture argument. But I thought that was a really unique way of approaching a story.
Is that the nanny one or what is it? No. Yeah, that's the nanny.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That was just so weird, man. So weird.
Was one of the least weird ones. I was like, that's the one that I like. That's the one where I'm like, I got that one.
Well, I have two things. First is with the reading. I'm reading it slower for Elizabeth and Jacob, who used to read science fiction. What stopped? What made you stop reading? Because I've never been into science fiction, and a lot of it, honestly, is because so much science fiction is dystopian. And I don't like dystopian fiction. It makes me anxious. And so reading this, I was actually very worried that there'd be more dystopia. And at least all of the ones I've read so far, all the short stories were not dystopian. But then to the point of the nanny ad, or like it's formatted like a museum excerpt, or like an explanation of a museum piece. I thought that was so fascinating because yes, it's I feel like it's not even really satire, but it's very much hitting on how caretaking is exported to primarily like Black women or immigrant women in the United States, and like what does their labor actually look like. And obviously it's pretty explicit in the text. Oh, we can't trust your caretakers, so you have to use a robot. And then thinking about what parenting can look like now on the other end of the spectrum, where at least on the Instagram Reels, there's so many new moms who are like, well, your village didn't show up, but at the same time, they don't trust anybody with their child. And there's also a lot of AI driven or algorithm driven ads for new parents, especially new mothers, to buy all these different products that will make your life easier. When the underpinning issue is we don't have a trust built society and we don't trust other adults with children. And so like caretaking requires multiple people, not just the parents who gave birth or who are the legal guardians. And I just thought like this short story brought up so many things for me, especially as a new parent. But yeah, to Jacob or Elizabeth, why did you stop reading sci-fi?
Oh, sorry, I forgot. So I don't know if there was really a reason. I think overall I stopped reading as much like after in college and grad school, just because all my reading was reading for school. So I was like, I don't want to read. And then like after grad school, I kind of had a phase of like just wanting to read nonfiction for some reason. And it took me a while to get back into fiction. And I just never got back into science fiction. I guess it's because like my mind is different now. Like I don't have as open of a mind, I guess, when I'm approaching things, sadly.
No, what you said about being in college, and this is crazy, I really fell out of love with reading, and I kind of stopped reading for enjoyment for years, which is so crazy to think about now. But I really just kind of stopped reading as a whole. But also, I would say there is so much amazing science fiction on TV and in the movies that I find myself gravitating towards Black Mirror sooner than I'll gravitate towards, an Arthur C. Clarke book. And if I really want my science fiction kick from a book, I go to young adult.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like I do tend to do better with the young adult stuff just because it's like if my brain is going to have to learn a whole new culture in 5 pages, it's going to be easier in a teen novel.
Well, and I wonder, like, one of the reasons I wanted to read this book or try was because of Arrival, right? And how that movie was just blew me away. It was incredible, and that's also a Ted Chiang based on a Ted Chiang short story, right? I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, yeah, and I guess that because, and just hearing you say that, Jacob, about like, well, I might go, there's TV shows, there's stuff like there's other ways in which to approach sci-fi that like a little light came on for me. I was like, yeah, because I got to marinate in this story. Maybe that was it. I had to sit down and like, it's so funny to use a movie as like the construct for this, but it helped me slow down and watch a whole story unfold slowly and consider like various, aspects of it in a way that maybe I just couldn't suspend my disbelief as easily on the printed page, because I was caught up in my head of like, this makes no sense. Gold foil whirring around, like spinning around in somebody's brain, and they're suspended and they're trying, what's happening? Like, show me. And maybe my, feeble imagination at this point, like can't quite get it there because I'm out of practice. It really isn't my genre either. I mean, I also agree with or identify with Elizabeth's sort of like feeling like, yeah, I just find myself really liking nonfiction, liking that sort of stuff. And this is just like fiction, like turned up to 11 for me. Is reading has been my experience reading this book, at least.
There's a story in here that that like is didn't seem very like sci-fi to me. Actually seemed much more like, well, the one about the great silence. I don't know if anyone well, if you, oh, so that's like the idea that we are constantly as human beings trying to find other beings in another galaxy, in another universe, who's speaking our language out there, this constant reach for communication with some other group of living beings in another on another planet in space. It's narrated from the point of view of a parrot, which is like the weird sci-fi part of it, but I also read it more as like just sort of a like a parable, like a satirical way. I don't know what, like a different way to tell the story, which is we have a lot of beings around us all the time on this earth who we could possibly communicate with, who communicate with each other, who, you know, like we never want to think about diving into trying to figure out what all these other living beings on this earth are trying to say to us or to each other. And we ignore them and we harm them and we imperil them, and yet constantly are going to spend all our time and money searching around in space for something. And I think that while that is like very sci-fi based, I think what I brought this up now is that it's like, for me, it brings up these kind of nonfiction ideas of like, every time I read something in the news about someone sending a new thing, all the money that we put into sending rockets into space, or just the money that we spend in general in searching for life outside of our own Earth that is not put into actual living creatures around us all the time. And I just thought to have it from the point of view of a parrot was like really interesting, strange, but also so well done. And it just reminded me, it made me think a lot about like the hubris of human beings too, and that like we want to explore things that are new discoveries for humans. Like we have, you know, we've expanded our world, we've grown, we've done these great, it's like the westward expansion, you know, or there's all these adventure stories. Whereas if we had to turn around and look at the smaller things around us, that would be less human centered. And and then it also brings up all these questions about how we treat animals. And so I just felt like I was reading this one story that I was like, oh my God, there's so many different pieces of what I think about when I read the news here. And I think about just like with our climate. And so it was interesting to me to read this short piece of fiction that was really almost kind of could have been funny because it's narrated from the point of view of a parrot, but that made me feel like I could be reading a lot of, doesn't make me feel like I could be reading a lot of nonfiction, but it connected a lot of ideas, real ideas is what I'm trying to say.
I think in the back of the book, it says that, I think that's where I read this. He's talking about like each story in the back and like what the inspiration was for each one. And I think he talks about how that was an art installation and it was a collaborative piece. And so there was like video footage of the birds, and then it was like at some botanical garden, and he had the choice to go there and chose not to. And then when he saw the finished piece, he was like, oh man, I really should have gone. But like, he just wrote the story based on what the other artist gave to him. And it was like read over the video footage of the parrots.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would have really liked to see that. That sounds like an amazing art exhibit. But the short story by itself is great too. Like, you don't need everything else, but I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. I appreciated his notes in the end of the book too. I think it, was nice to know where he was coming from when he wrote the stories. And also you're like, oh yeah, okay. I get it.
Okay, I'm definitely going to check those notes out.
Yeah. And I would read, like, if you're going to read one more story from this at all, like, I don't know, that one felt different to me in a way, the Great Silence. And I just thought it was a really intelligent and interesting way to look at some very relevant things.
So I do want to honor the fact that while Fatema is very sick, she did send a few thoughts. And these are about stories that we've either referred to or have actively talked about. So I want to read her comment as it relates to the Digient story, which is the longest story in the book. So quote, the one about online communities and software going out of date, I related so hard to this. As someone who has transitioned through multiple iterations of fandom, GeoCities, LiveJournal, Dreamwidth, and Tumblr, it's hard when the existing technologies either go out of date or push out certain communities because they can't be profited from. That's what happened with GeoCities and Tumblr. I think online communities offer a refuge for a lot of people in community when they don't have it, but it's hard to maintain with evolving technologies. The Atlantic recently had an article about Instagram and how it's turning off users, especially younger users, because of its seeking profit. How it went from a space where people could share with their friends and family to strangers. In an effort to draw in more people, they essentially destroyed all the community they cultivated. And I feel like, I mean, I read that comment right before I read the story, and I was like, oh, yeah, that is a huge theme in this book, or in this, it felt like a book, so it was the longest one, but in that short story.
I think it's interesting
Yeah,
too,
I mean,
that like, sorry, go ahead, Lauren.
no, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, like, the communities that kind of hang around after everything's gone, like there's still some people that are like hanging on to this old technology. Like, I know people still use Tumblr, but like, for what?
Yeah, I guess that's why I thought that story had a very dystopian tinge to me. You know, it felt like sorrowful. It felt like loss. You know, it felt like, dang, why can't we? You know, these people who want something that seems like it might never pay off. Frankly, it might never pay money like off in a money way, a monetary way, but it's clearly paying off for them in a relational way. Both like it seems amongst one another and like pushing one another. That's what really like stuck out to me is like, wow, this community really cares about their digients. They really care about their charges, you know, and they're willing to like experiment and really consider things and push one another. And while also cultivating this life that ultimately like no one else really cares about. And in fact, the forces of, call it capitalism, are actively, like stunting their growth or stymieing their growth in ways. And that felt like, that's heavy. And that is an aspect of living on the internet, such as we have done so far, from the 90s on. And like, I've also experienced the life and death of some of my beloved internet, places. And it does inspire like a sort of like wariness to really go deep because, you just never know when the rug might be pulled out from under you. That's not like a productive or that's not a way that one can really feel invested, for lack of a better word. It's not sustainable.
I think it's interesting.
But then
too,
I guess
like
there's this. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, we keep talking over each other. Like in the beginning of the internet, the idea of the internet was like so positive, and like we didn't think that it would be regulated to this extent to what it is today. So it's like I feel like there was an idealism in the beginning of like this stuff will last forever, but it's not going to. Like the things on the internet have the same ability to be taken away as things in other realities do. And like the main point of that is like, is it profitable? And if it's not, then it's likely not going to continue.
I mean, it felt very timely with Twitter, even though Twitter has been on a pretty strong decline for regular users over the past few years. I don't remember which publication it was in, but there was an article, a really poignant one about how regular users went from posting to just being consumers, Twitter. And it's because of the way they wanted to profit. They reorganized and redid the algorithm to profit off of viral tweets or profit off of advertisements, as opposed to like building that community. Like personally, I had a strong community even on Twitter when I used to work in Missouri politics. There was a hashtag MOLEG for Missouri legislature. And that's how I met people who worked in the Capitol or worked in the ecosystem, or when I eventually left to move up to Michigan, I could kind of still follow along. But when you destroy an algorithm and you destroy like access to that hashtag, a readily available hashtag, then you lose more than just the historic information or in real time information. You lose the people who built that infrastructure to begin with.
Yeah, and I guess like the other thing that is just on my mind, and I'm interested what other people think about this too, is like, well, on the other hand, you know, things die. On the other hand, it might be time to create something new. And, you know, I was thinking about this because a friend from middle school sent me a link to a website that he created in 2002 that still managed, it's still up. I don't know how, but you know, this particular web server is still like serving up this website. And there's a picture of me awkwardly taking like a selfie of myself in the mirror when I'm like 12, you know, there it is. It's still up on his page. And like, there's a certain like sweetness to that. Like, oh, wow. Yeah, here we are. Like we're dorks and we're still, you know, you can still find us 20 years later. But like, also like part of me was definitely thinking, well, it's good that this isn't easily found and this is some weird backwater website. You know what I mean? Like sometimes things need to be put to rest.
I mean, that definitely bleeds into the story about, second, it's the one I'm in the middle of right now, with Remem, or remember, like basically a commentary on how so many people document every single moment of their lives. And this is now a technology that would allow you to basically control F through everything you've ever cataloged and provide that quote unquote evidence. And I mean, Lauren, you're right. Like some things can just die. Also, like that's the beauty of memory is you don't have to remember everything you've ever said or done or experienced. It all builds on each other, but you don't need to have those specific points. The human brain, while powerful, doesn't need that clutter. And so what does a technology that documents everything and has a library of everything you've ever done, what does that actually mean for our sense of self or our sense of growth and moving forward?
And
Yeah,
then
I
that
think there's.
story.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jacob. No.
I'll go next.
Okay, I was just saying there's a piece in that story where he actually talks about like forgiving and forgetting, and the idea that like maybe remembering everything specifically is not the best way to move forward at all, and that you have to forget a little in order to create a good story around what actually happened, which is kind of an interesting idea. Like if everyone remembered everything all the time, this stories we told would be, there wouldn't, you know, we wouldn't even need to tell stories. But yeah, it's just an interesting point of that story.
I think that was the story where it was like going between two different stories in one.
Yeah.
And at one point he's like, we don't think about reading being a technology, but like it is. And it changes. So he uses this like example of someone who was in a society that didn't write. They were passing everything down orally, and like what that meant for their culture and what it meant for him to become someone who wrote, and what he would have to give up to become a member of a different culture that thought in a different way. So I just thought that was really interesting, and I liked the like parallel between those two. I thought this story was really good. I really liked it.
And something that story made me think about as well is like, so what if I could remember everything that happened to me with extreme clarity? But in my real life, it's almost like when I'm scrolling through social media, I'm remembering other people's lives and I'm filling my head with that. Like I know that my Aunt Sandy had a Big Mac on Tuesday. I know that my friend Marie went to Turks and Caicos last week. And it's like, I'm shoving all this in my brain for what? But that I would like to see him write that story as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like, what if you had that implant and you never had to like think again? But it's interesting. I don't want to spoil anything, but since you're in the middle of it, but like,
Yeah.
the character who is like against using remem is like eventually comes around to be like, actually, maybe this is a good thing because I didn't remember anything, right? But like, would everyone have that experience? We don't know.
Right. And how much would it change about how you have been relating to people if what you were remembering was the complete opposite of what you thought it was? And I also did like the writing, like the flip side of that story, the going back and forth, because I thought about like the storytelling, the oral tradition and passing on language. And there's like how we assume writing is this wonderful technology, right? And it is a technology, but the people who don't use writing are like, but you're losing so much. You're losing expression and you're losing, when I tell you a story, I'm doing it with more than just the words that are coming out of my mouth, right? Like all these different components of me are telling you the story. When you write something down, all I see are the words. And so I just like, I really liked that back and forth. It made me think a lot about how we pass on information.
Yeah, and I guess that like gets back sort of to that the story about the Digents and like how, one of the lessons learned toward the end is that this community of Digent enthusiasts realizes experience is the only way, right? You can't, and how we could all read the same book and get something different out of it or something else. So, like lessons are learned differently or not at all, which is why we have book discussion groups. We all can share our perspectives, but at the end of the day, and that's almost like an easier way to like. It's like your brains have already done the work of like filtering the information, and I get to like enjoy what you learned, right? Rather than like, oh, what's this picture of a hamburger doing? Like, like what's this? It's more like you've synthesized the information and you are having to explain it to me orally, and you're doing it with, with your gestures, with your passion, your smile or something. And like, that helps me like, whoa, we'll slow down a second. Like Lucy really got something here. This is big, or not, or like, oh wow, Lucy, I still don't understand you. You're right. Like distilling, I don't know, this technology of writing has its drawbacks too.
But then even to add to that, like as far as remembering things and how we remember things and choose to take in and filter information, it's like there's still like you're getting all these distillations of what these people thought by what we're telling you here, but it's still only what our perspective of was it, like I don't like if we all remembered everything perfectly, would we even have different perspectives of things, because there's only going to be one way. And I don't know, it's interesting to think about. And like, as you're saying, Lauren, even coming together to talk about a book is a really good example of it, because we all came in here sort of differently with feelings and thoughts about what we'd read and what it meant. And I don't know. Yeah, there's lots that story and all the stories just got my brain really like, phew.
Something I'm reflecting on, this is a secondhand story, but a friend went to an art gallery and saw this piece of art where looking at it face value, it was nothing, but he felt like he was seeing a dog. And then he read the description, and what it was it was the artist had worked with a neuroscientist and like mapped what people's brains pictured when they pictured a dog, and took those neural pathways and made it into art. And so you look at it and you feel like you're seeing a dog, but it's not actually a dog. And that was such a wild understanding of how we are manipulated by technology into thinking that what we're seeing is true, that perception is only one way, and that what we're given is the whole picture, and that it's not just a way of tapping into our inherent biases or previous experiences to keep us engaged. And there were so many different parts in this in these short stories where I kept thinking about, well, yes, technology is very useful as a tool, but what does over reliance on technology look like for community building? I mean, the fact that we're doing this as a virtual conversation means like we're missing out on the in-person energy comes with getting to know people. And I feel like I know most of you pretty well through our conversations, but I know this is only one aspect of who you are. And I see you for an hour a month. I don't see you every day in person. And I feel like this type of like mind meldiness is really the theme throughout all of his short stories.
And just to piggyback off of what you said, in Zoom meetings, I'm the type of person when other people are talking, I go, oh, oof, yes. Ooh, that's cool. So when I'm in Zooms, I have to keep myself on mute. Because if I don't, then it's just like somebody saying something and then me being like, cool. And then like the whole video shifts. But that's a part of how I communicate. And I think really what it is I'm trying to show that I'm listening. I don't know. But that's something, just to go off what you said, that I kind of laugh at myself every time I'm in these Zoom meetings or discussions. And I'm just like, I just have to pause, mute myself because I'm talking.
But and on the other side of that, like if you were in, I think it's very validating. I mean, what you're doing, like if we were in a meeting in person with you and you could do that, and I was like saying something and you're like, yes, I would be like, oh my gosh, wait, I said that right. I'm a smart person, you know? And like, so if you're having to mute all that and you're doing in this Zoom meeting, you're just kind of like, right, I have these thoughts. Am I making any sense? And you can rely on facial expression somewhat, but who knows where any of us are looking at any given time when it's a screen, right? And so we do miss that on both sides. Like you miss interjecting, and I think you miss receiving the interjections. So.
Yeah, I think interjecting in Zoom is like at risk of derailing the entire process.
Mm-hmm.
I would be remiss if I didn't read Fatema's other comment, and it's about the first story. So she says, the question of memory is fascinating to me. The story where they could travel to the past or the future to gain insight from themselves, to me, was a literal manifestation of what we do when we engage in healing work. We rewrite memories, add new context, etc., whenever we revisit them with the intention of understanding, and not to have memories soften or fade over the years. What if, well, that's PTSD, isn't it? To constantly be thrown back into it and not interrogate it. It would mean we've never gotten over anything or moved forward. It would be just as painful as the moment when it happened. Even if it's a good moment, it would be painful because we may not be feeling so great right now. And Lauren, this definitely ties into some comments you made about letting go. And it's interesting that the first story kind of creates that, like, primes us to think about memory and different timelines. But then all these other stories afterwards kind of veer away from that and say, okay, well, what about the agency in memory? You're like as an individual.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about what Fatema said about that first story. I think like, I don't know, I really enjoyed the first story. I would say it was probably one of my favorites. But who knows? I'll read the rest and maybe have a different opinion in a month. But I'd say just like one thing that stayed with me from that first story about being able to time travel, right? As the realization that you can't change anything by even if you wanted to. You couldn't. You could just learn better. You could better understand, like, okay, oh, right, I see. This is what is, you know, why I did this. I don't know. I was really struck by like that. You know, the story of the man who traveled forward in time to steal from himself, and then realized like, and then you understand that like he gets it. He stole from himself, and so his old self is having to like older self is having to save up so that he can get stolen from his former self. I don't know. Something about that was just like that. I don't know. Maybe something about that also makes me just it resonates with what Fatema was saying about like I don't know, revisiting trauma, maybe something really important, and just being caught in a loop about it rather than trying to understand it, because with understanding would bring healing. I don't know. I'm gonna have to think about that some more.
Yeah, I think that one's hard to get because it's like, I mean, time travel has always been something that's like, I don't know how to understand it. And it's like, I think that his interpretation of time travel is probably like, it says in the back, it's based on Einstein's theory. It seems like that would be like, if time travel were real, that's how it would happen. Like, it's like a sideways thing. You're just like going back and forth in time, but like nothing's changing. And you won't know that until you're older because your younger self hasn't experienced it. Yeah, I don't know. I thought it gave me a lot to think about. I don't know if I have anything else, but yeah, it was a really interesting one and like a great way to start off for sure, and definitely opens up a lot of questions that we talked about later in further stories.
I'm sorry.
I'm done.
Elizabeth. Okay, I just wanted to like make sure I wanted to ask again, Sheela, what you said, that like the first story is different and then these other stories sort of veer off in this other direction. What was that again?
Yeah. Well, the way that I thought about the first story was, it's like there's healing in understanding your memories. Like you can also forget them. So, like it felt like it was a little bit more forgiving of memory, and experience, while the other ones, like for instance, the REMM one, where it's like you have all of these memories and you can't adjust them. Like they are considered absolute truth. And that felt a lot harsher and feels a lot more like if you can go back and revisit all of your memories without the ability to erase them or like soften them from your memory, that it's like like anything you've ever said that makes you feel anxious or embarrassed, or even all the way up to something that's very violent or feels very traumatic, you have no way of removing that.
Yeah, I really loved that first story. Was one of my favorites, I think, out of all of them. And I do think he says like in the note that um said it where he did and with the characters that he did, because it's about sort of like it's a little bit about accepting fate and sitting with your fate, and um it is what it is. And that idea of time travel, like, yeah, you can move back and forth within your own timeline, but you're not going to change anything. It's like what you're saying, Laura, you're just going to gain knowledge about what happened or what will happen. And then I think Fatima's comment about like really does give me a lot more to think about in that story, and applying that context elsewhere, and how yeah, that story does seem different than the other ones as far as how it treats memory, and it does seem more gentle, I guess,
So we're at the top of the hour, and I want to respect everyone's time. This was a fantastic conversation. And I mean, I came into this month apprehensive about reading sci-fi, and y'all have made that leap of faith totally worthwhile. And just thank you, everybody, for being interested and providing thoughtful perspectives.
Thank you. Again, I say it every time, but thank you for putting this book in our hands, because like I would not have picked this one up. And I think you can probably tell I really got a lot out of it. So thank you again.
Of course. And this is obviously it's December, so this is the last book of the year. But most of the books for next year, Fatema, I haven't read. So it's going to be a real grab bag of literature. And I'm so excited that we're going to continue this relationship into 2023.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed.
We're all really excited about that. Yeah.